Today, I'm speaking with Madison Mohns. She's the lead of product management for responsible AI at Indeed, the #1 job listing website in the world, with over 350 million unique visitors every single month. She builds out tools for teams to do good, ethical product development. She works with taxonomists, data scientists, engineers, and more, driving innovation by augmenting their work with AI solutions. Her TED Talk, AI and the Paradox of Self-Replacing Workers, has already garnered over 500,000 views. She's now featured on the official TED Conference's website. We're excited to dive in what the responsible advancement of AI could look like for the future of work. So welcome, Madison.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for our chat.
So let's just dive right in. What's your favorite way to use AI right now? It could be personal, professional, like what's cutting edge for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say cutting edge, but I am a part-time student in addition to my full-time job. And I know there's plenty of controversies about using AI in the field of education. I grew up without those tools, and now I'm really understanding why it could be so effective in educational environments. I am diving into subject matter that isn't like up the alley of my typical disciplines. And so as I'm kind of processing more complex and like unique material that I haven't really encountered before, I've really like benefited from, using generative AI applications to kind of tease out ideas as I'm either like writing a paper, or if I'm trying to like read through an academic paper in like philosophy or something that I hadn't really gotten a ton of experience with in the past. So yeah, I really enjoy using it for kind of studying and really being able to grasp new material. And I think that it's really nice because it's a more personalized way to learn. I remember growing up, there are certain subjects that just didn't mesh well with me, and asking a teacher 100 million questions in a classroom of 40 plus kids. And then when you get to college and you're undergrad, you're in these lecture halls of hundreds of people. So you don't really
Mhm.
get that personalized, unique experience. And so, yeah, it's really nice to like be able to ask unlimited questions, have the answers to those questions rephrased in a way that might resonate better with you. And I've just found it as like a wonderful personal tutor as I
Mhm.
embark on this new educational experience. So,
Yeah, it really is miraculous to be able to ask it the question that you want to ask whoever's trying to explain the thing and say, okay, could you, explain it to me in these terms, or like how would you say it this way, or give me an example here, and all of a sudden have this like magic mind be able to explain someone else's thing maybe better than they can. Yeah.
yeah, totally. Or even ask it like, what kinds of questions should I have about this thing? Some of the material I read is so dense, I'm like, I don't even know where to start here. Like, give me a couple of questions to kind of prompt my thinking here, and then
Mhm.
I can kind of dive in and get a little bit more nuanced with the way that I'm kind of organizing my thoughts and coming up with ideas. So yeah, it's really, really helpful for navigating that. And yeah, I always laugh thinking back to like when my parents were helping me with school, and they're like, well, we had to go to a library, and I'm like, now I'm sounding old, like, well, I had to Google it. And now it's like, these kids are have tons of access. So I think if it's used right and it's helping you reinforce the way that you learn, I think education is becoming more accessible as long as it's not hallucinating on bad data. So, that's a problem for another conversation, I'm sure. So,
Okay, so you're the product manager for responsible AI. Can you give us some context about your role? What does that mean? What does it look like?
yeah, totally. Yeah, super excited. I just started a new role about a month ago at Indeed, leading the responsible AI efforts. I was really interested in kind of bridging over some of my experiences in academia, studying kind of the intersection of ethics and society with the way that we innovate and build out new experiences through technology. And what better place to kind of merge that at a company like Indeed, who has, honestly, a large part of people's fate in their hands by helping them get jobs and ultimately connect them to ways to be able to thrive and, grow in their experiences throughout life. So I took up this job about a month ago. My main prerogative, I guess, in terms of what I work on is making sure that Indeed's products, whether that they're already in production or the ones that we are working on developing in the background, that will be launched in the future, are ultimately following, ethical and responsible practices for developing technologies. And essentially, what that means is that since we hold the fate of our job seekers in our hands, we want to make sure that the data that is feeding into any type of algorithms or models or any type of AI powered experiences across our site is ultimately going to serve our users in good ways for them.
Hmm.
So we don't want to be disadvantaging different types of job seekers from like their gender background or their ethnicity or their race, ultimately things that really shouldn't play any role in us making a decision whether or not they should be presented for an opportunity. And so as companies like my own are constantly trying to innovate and make things more efficient internally as well as for their users, it's really important to look at these systems with a critical eye, because not all technologies are ultimately good the first time you build them out. So even if the intention behind that is good. So yeah, my team is really looking at making sure that everything we already have shipped is fair and ultimately like good for people. But also, as new technologies such as generative AI hit the market and companies like Indeed are trying to experiment with how they might leverage those technologies to build out more engaging and robust product experiences for their users,
Hmm.
we need to have a stance on how to do that in a way that ultimately is safe and isn't causing harm to people. So
Hmm.
yeah, really trying to kind of match the pace of and the velocity of product development with also kind of being a little bit more discerning about how we go about doing those innovations in a good way.
Can you give us a kind of look at how Indeed is using AI or leveraging AI to create more personalized human to human connection during job application?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the things that's really great about a site like Indeed is that we have a ton of really rich and deep information about the jobs as well as the job seekers that we have on our site,
Mm,
more so than you'd probably be able to get just from looking at a resume or reading through a job description. There's a lot of signals that are really important for being able to ultimately make the connections that are needed to connect an employer to their next best employee. And
mhm,
likewise, for a job seeker, they might have completely different preferences than what an employer is able to offer at the time. And so we want to make sure that we're honoring both of those sides of our complex marketplace. So it starts from the beginning, like what data do we actually have about our job seekers? We have a bunch of unstructured data about them, which is things like their resume, the raw job description. We have structured data, which are things that we use machine learning models to basically extract and parse information to make that matching experience a little bit easier on the back end. And then there's all of this like rich behavioral information about how job seekers are actually searching and discovering their next best role. And we can
mm,
understand that engagement and those behaviors in a way that can help us point them to what they're really looking to grow into in the future. So we have some of these like past looking signals about their experiences and some of the forward looking inferences that we make about how they actually are behaving on our site that might show us maybe something different than they initially had been able to present about themselves and in the documents that we have to represent them. So lots of things. We have machine learning models that are actually helping with that candidate matching. And then ultimately, if you think about like if you're a small business owner and you don't have someone on staff to do HR or any type of like recruiting, Instead of you having to look through like a cajillion resumes or reach out to candidates, there's a ton of AI powered features across Indeed that help do that work for you. And then the human experience really comes in for them to kind of break it down and discern what they are really looking for, because they can only tell us so much. And so yeah, there's just like a million different places, I guess, on the site that use
Yeah.
AI. And ultimately, we want it to be kind of an expert in the loop type of situation, where we know that HR professionals, as well as business owners that don't have HR departments, ultimately are the best people to make the decision at the end of the day for what's best for them. But if we can kind of at least make that process a little bit easier for them in their very busy days, what can we automate or what can we augment that makes their job a little bit easier, and then ultimately connects people to opportunities for their next best role.
Do you have any case studies or maybe success stories where AI was implemented in a way that increased productivity, but also improved kind of the satisfaction of your team and your employees, and also made them feel more secure rather than maybe threatened?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, one of the major things that I discovered when implementing AI in my own team for productivity is that it is a really scary exercise. A lot of people perceive AI as a replacement. And in many cases, especially as these technologies become more proficient at tasks that we do in our day to day lives, it can be just that, a replacement. And so,
Mhm.
helping employees really understand the value that they bring uniquely as real life humans is somewhat of a interesting exercise that I never thought I'd have to do before. So
Mm.
I kind of think back to when I first joined Indeed. There was a desire to kind of grow our market share across different global markets. And historically, my team had a very manual approach to being able to launch in a new market. And a lot of the things that we were able to do when we were launching a market didn't naturally translate to other markets just because they didn't share anything from like language. And then also like finding a job in different countries is very, very different. Like, do you need an
Mm.
apprenticeship, or are there certifications in that country? Like, what are the things that actually make up the hiring marketplace in these different regions? And um, in order to do that, we would have had to hire like a cajillion people, right? That
Mm.
have these
Mhm.
like really important innate understandings of these marketplaces. And ultimately, at the time, we wanted to figure out how we could get that off the ground as quickly as possible. So there were a lot of things that were manual in those workflows before that ultimately were kind of like rote rehearsal types of tasks for these individuals who a lot of these people had like PhDs. They were researchers in another life. And so these are really, really smart, talented people that were reduced to doing some of these like very like simple tasks. And
Mm.
so we wanted to figure out like what is the ultimate value that these very, very smart, talented individuals bring to our team. And ultimately, it was that kind of research and discovery process that really was important at the upfront. And then how could we then take some of the things that they didn't value as much as a part of their time and give them more time to do the things that really they were excited to be doing. So that's happened a couple of times in the old team that I managed, where we'd have some sort of process, we'd figure out how to basically train some sort of machine learning model or automated decision making system to mimic the thought processes of the humans that are the subject matters experts in the loop, to train that system over time. And then eventually we can take that task, have a machine do it, and then there's ultimately more time for them to work on other types of things that might be a little bit more satisfying or engaging over time. And so, yeah, I think I've been very lucky to work with people that are very flexible and wanting to continuously upskill and reskill into roles that ultimately are able to kind of lean into those characteristics that make them who they are as people, and ultimately are a little bit more intellectually stimulating for them. So I
Mhm.
think that's a good high level example of how that can work out. But yeah, I think it's very tough. Like I found like initially pitching that task of, hey, you're gonna train this system to do the things that you do, and that's like the quintessential thing that they were doing. It's a very scary proposal, and it doesn't land lightly on me that's a really hard thing to request of someone, especially if you aren't at the exact same time carving out and helping them understand what the future looks like with them in it. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of the premise of why I made my TED Talk in the first place is there's so many C-suite level executives that are wanting to employ AI in the workplace, but ultimately they aren't the people managers close to the ground that are actually having to deal with the implications of these paradoxes that are introduced, because at the end of the day, these are real life people, and you have to navigate that leadership very sensitively and
Hmm.
help people understand their place as we kind of line up with these more hybrid environments where we have AI augmenting the workplace, at least in the short term. So, yeah, hopefully that kind of gets at the meat of the question.
Yeah, and what do you see as the best path for companies and entrepreneurs and people that have teams to make sure that their team feels valued and empowered rather than threatened? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, one thing that I've seen to be extremely effective is having the use of AI in the workplace become more transparent, especially from the top down. Like it has been extremely impactful. If I have like a leader in my company that is like, hey, we want to automate these things. Here's how I'm automating parts of my job. It makes it feel a little less threatening because it's not like, oh, I'm commanding all the people below me to like become
Right.
robots. I'm also finding ways to leverage this. And so I think really having, like I said, transparent communication about how AI is helping you and having that be a very like open and honest conversation can make it feel a lot less elusive in nature, and ultimately can help a lot of folks in your same position. Like a lot of the creative ways that I've started using AI in my role, I wouldn't have thought of naturally myself.
Hmm.
But other peers that are doing similar work in the same like function or discipline as me have found really helpful ways to make their lives easier. And so if I can ultimately be a more productive worker and have more time to do more interesting creative work, because I'm, not doing some of the things I typically would slave away at. I'm all for that, and I think publicizing the use of AI in the workplace can be really it's just like it kind of desensitizes the topic,
Hmm.
and it's no longer as taboo. So I would say that that is one thing. I think if you are going to be introducing some sort of automation oriented approach on your team, making people aware of like why you're doing that and making sure that you're preserving the things that your team values the most to the extent that it makes sense for the business is extremely impactful. And having that raw and honest conversation of like, hey, what else, if you had like a couple of extra hours in your day, like what would you want to do with it? Like, let's give you that time back to do those things. And like, what do you hate about your job? What would you like to hand off to some other sad soul? And let's give that to no sad soul, because ultimately AI doesn't have a soul and they're not going to suffer for doing some of the tasks that you don't even enjoy in your work. So I think that that's really helpful, and yeah, just kind of helping people understand and, like I said, kind of project into the future what does their function look like in this evolving landscape, and being really transparent. Like that might not be something that a leader might know up front, but I'm urging people to think about that and have a stance on that so that they can actually stick to it and build confidence in the people that are working for them, that they care enough to help project that into the future.
Yeah, it's what a great point, right? To just show up and actually show your team how you're using it so that they can see you doing it and it can become more normalized and also gives them permission. So I think some people feel almost obligated to do things that they don't like doing. I mean, this is a bigger topic, but yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It, Go ahead. You're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, there's a ton of thought leaders in the community saying at this point in time, AI is not going to replace you, but people that do use AI will replace you.
Hmm.
So I think it's less about being scared about every single aspect of your role or your job being automatable and really thinking about how can you become a better version of yourself at work by leveraging these tools in a way that ultimately benefits you and then like residually will also benefit whatever business that you're working with. So
Hmm.
I think that's a really good, I think, current point in time look at how the future of work looks. That's not to
Hmm.
say that these technologies are never going to be able to fully replace things, and that's a whole nother like
Different level. Yeah.
philosophical debate. But I think at this point in time, like that's the path that we're on. And so yeah, I try to encourage everyone that I work with to be, open and honest about how they're leveraging it because yeah, I want to know all the deets and the tips. So yeah.
Okay, quick action step here. So the key is learning how to prompt better. You start out prompting by just asking questions and talking to AI like it's a helper. But you quickly realize that getting better at prompting is a huge accelerator and game changer for your own success in life. So these prompts will not only help you get a lot more done faster and accelerate your success, but they'll also help you really get prompting and get better at it. You can get all of these as a gift from me just by going to metamind.co/gift. That's metamind.co/gift. And I'll put that link below and then just opt in to get it. I've also created a powerful video for you called AI in the Future of Business and Work and Success that demonstrates some of the key mindsets and prompting strategies to help you get up to speed and get a lot more out of generative AI. And it's also included as a free gift when you register. So just head over to metamind.co/gift to get your AI Accelerator Prompt Pack and the other free goodies. All right, back to our interview. In your TED Talk, you talk about 3 leadership principles when it comes to AI. Could you kind of tell us about them and maybe give us some practical examples of how someone could implement them in the workplace?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the first one I think was transformational transparency. And so
Mm,
that's really about getting consent when you're going to be introducing a new technology into the workplace that does ultimately work to displace some of the tasks or efforts that your team members have historically been in charge of doing. Um, I think that there's an interesting dynamic that goes on if you do not disclose the purpose of those technologies up front.
mm,
And people will actually, over time, and you can see this in like past studies of history, like in the Industrial Revolution and stuff, like people will try to actually um, kind of like sabotage the
mm.
systems because they ultimately don't want um, those systems to displace them because they don't really have a vision into what is happening. And people aren't stupid. Like they know when something's happening. So I think it's really important for leaders to be basically straight up with all of their employees about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and give people that transparency and the ability to consent into like being a part of that. If not, like, let's figure out where else to put you because you shouldn't have to do a task that makes you feel super uncomfortable. The next one was collaborative AI augmentation, which was essentially what I was saying before. Like, find parts of your job that you hate, automate those things, and keep the things that you really like to do because ultimately it probably builds a lot more value and is good for you and like being stimulating and probably the thing that you've leaned in the most that makes you a unique add to whatever organization that you're in. And then I don't even remember what my last principle was, but I think it's more around like upskilling and reskilling, and that's a
Mhm.
really intentional effort. One thing that I've seen in teams when they say, okay, we're going to like upskill or we're going to reskill our workforce, is that they give people like access to Skillshare or some sort of skilling platform through the business, but then like they don't give their employees any time, like dedicated time carved out in their day to actually start thinking about like what else do I want to do? What else could I do? And I think that it's on managers just as much as it is on employees to help actually give that like really well needed time as part of your day for learning and development. And I think that the main area that is really important is just to make that like a ubiquitous part, like set up time your Friday afternoons from like 1 to 5 p.m. It's just strictly for learning and development. And whether you have some sort of thing that you're going to try to automate with AI or not, like every employee is entitled to be able to look past whatever is happening to them now and have access to that opportunity. And actually, access means like, how do I actually learn these things? And so connecting them through those platforms or through other individuals to mentor them at work, all these different options and possibilities, but also the actual time to sit in and actually grok a lot of the information that's going to be ultimately new for them. So yeah, I think like at my my current or my past team has a whole program that they're helping people figure out how to leverage generative AI technologies at work to help them do a lot of research and discovery and all these other types of things that they do. And so, yeah, I think making that like a formal part of what it means to be an employee at a company is a very intentional step that managers should take, but ultimately, like it's hard to make that decision when you're paying people for working hours that aren't going to immediately come to fruition and come to use. So, yeah, I think it's kind of a sacrifice to be made. It's like a long-term ploy for sure, but your employees will definitely appreciate you for it.
Yeah, I've heard about studies too that that showed that training, consistently brings high ROI in the long run. Yeah,
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 yeah, much
important.
so.
What are some more practical steps that business owners could take to ensure that AI, it really feels like it's enhancing their team and human potential rather than just replacing it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we've done show and tells in the past of like,
Hmm.
"Hey, here's how I used AI to do this thing," or like, "Look at this cool tool I built." And, I think that that's a really practical way to encourage that kind of discourse I was talking about, to just make things super transparent, but ultimately, it's a way for people to start figuring out how they like to talk about themselves in uh, association with whoever they're working with, as well as the AI companions that are ultimately assisting them in their work. And I think encouraging people to actually start talking about those things and like their unique value add is really, really important as these technologies become more and more ubiquitous. I know plenty of individuals that have been in interviews recently, and they'll get a question about like, how do you use AI at work? And actually having a narrative that positions you uh, really uniquely is really important, I think, especially as these businesses are trying to evolve. So yeah, I think like having some sort of show and tell type of environment not only helps with that kind of upskilling and reskilling, so you can see peers like yourself functioning and like where they're kind of seeing things as kind of a mentorship type of model, but
Hmm.
ultimately it's a really good exercise for folks to start envisioning themselves and where they actually fall in this new unique world that is being built. Sometimes, to our to be sorry, I'm fumbling, but like uh yeah, like how people will navigate this world that ultimately is unfolding before us.
Hmm. So you call yourself a cautious optimist when it comes to AI. So how do you see the relationship between humans and AI evolving over the next several years? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think In terms of the future of work, there's a couple of really interesting proposals being made, right?
Mhm.
So, like, we're not in a place right now where AI is this superhuman intelligence that can do everything under the sun. And there's a lot of, safety and ethics implications of that. But let's say that there's like this all knowing, wonderful AI that can do everything and it's not going to like kill anyone. Wonderful. Um, what does that mean for our relationship with labor? And I think there's two kind of interesting schools of thought there. One is like, is humanity's ultimate job leisure? Like, if we had to not work, what would that look like? Could we all just like engage in our creative pursuits? And like, would that be the best thing for humanity? And what are the implications around dignity, and what are the economic implications there of like does everyone get to not work, and like how do we make money if we don't work? What does the concept of universal basic income look like? How could we even make that happen from a policy point of view? And then there's other folks that have the opposite stance, is that like one of the things that ultimately makes us human and how we derive a lot of value and purpose is through the work that we do. And how do we continue in a world where we want these technologies to simply augment the human labor force rather than fully replacing it? And I think
Mhm.
looking at those like imaginaries of the future allows you to poke holes in a lot of arguments that are either like purely utopian or dystopian and all of these things. And it's a good thought experiment. But I think for me, it's really important to think about like what is happening with AI now. Some of these like grandiose visions of the future and these like sci-fi fantasies, they're on the horizon, but there are a lot of problems that are happening today that I think are a little bit more important for us to be tackling. So I think about things like looking at models. Models are ultimately built off of human data. A lot of that
Mm.
data is ultimately biased because humans have historically been biased in the way that we make decisions. So how do we employ teams like the team that I'm at, Indeed, to do that in a bunch of different cross sections of society to make sure that we're not imbuing more harm onto society? You can think about the environmental impacts of AI, like the amount of compute that these systems need sucks up a ton of energy, and that consumption is something to look into. You can think about data annotation and like how do we actually train these models, and what are the working conditions of the people that are doing these data annotation tasks
Mm.
in these third world countries, and the content they're exposed to. Like, there's so many things that are happening now that I think are worth our thought and energy. While we also ponder kind of these like, what if no one had to work? Wouldn't that be great? So yeah, I think that's kind of how I think about it.
What's so you're interested in ethics and AI, right? That's where some of your work is. What is the future of ethical AI?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a normative question. Like, what is the right thing to do, and who gets to make that call and that decision? I think that's a really, really interesting question that I don't have the direct answer to, but I think one thing, I'll give an example for people to ponder. So,
Mhm.
um, there's a big scandal that just happened recently with Google's Gemini product.
Mhm.
So they do a bunch of image generation, and one of the things that what does like good, responsible technology look like that happened and slipped through at this point was Google had this system that would basically imbue artificially diversity into imagery.
Mhm.
So like every X photo is going to have someone from a Asian Pacific Islander background, or Black or Hispanic or white or whoever it is.
Mhm.
And that was like ultimately like a good thought, right? Like it would be wonderful if the world could be representative of all the people that lived in it, and people could see themselves in art and in media. Like that's a big aspirational thing that a lot of people have written about for quite some time. And so Google, the purveyor of this technology, wanted to take that stance of like, okay, well, what if we were able to create a world where everyone was able to see themselves in a picture that we created? Well, that's really good until someone asks you to generate a photo of Nazis and you have underrepresented minority people dressed in Nazi uniforms, right? So that's an area where like technology as a whole might have a ethical stance of, hey, we are the builders of these technologies. We want a future where X happens. But what are all of the residual effects and like who are impacted by that, and what are the many, many possible permutations of where that could possibly not be how we want to be representing things? And so these are like very, very hard strategic questions that are in the hands of the people that are building technologies. And so to me, ethical and responsible product development means that any builder of a technology is ultimately not their user, right? Like I am, I guess if I
Mm.
was looking for a job, maybe I'm a user of Indeed, but I'm not looking for a job in retail. I'm not looking for a job as a trucker. So if I'm building technologies that are ultimately reflective of my values and who I am as a person without thinking about the many, many other people that might be consumers of my technology, I'm not developing with awareness. And so I think that's a mentality that I think is really important to educate all builders of technologies, whether they're product managers or data scientists or marketers, whoever it is. Um, and ultimately making sure that doing product development in a responsible way is as easy as possible. So how do we build out tools in these organizations that like, hey, I have an idea to like launch this new feature, let's run it through this quick system that will tell me if it's disparately impacting one group or another. And if it does, then we say, okay, let's like go back to the drawing board, like what is going on here, and diagnose the problem, maybe remove some pieces of information or like add information that the model was not aware of before, and then redeploy it. So really like harnessing this mindset and translating it into like concrete tools that technologists that are building these systems have easy access to, that's really just like a natural part of their workflows, I think is really helpful, because a lot of these questions are really big and really scary and very large. And so if you can give people something really tangible to react to rather than having them like think about these existential things up front, it kind of distributes the onus while like ensuring that everyone is accountable for the decisions that they're making on the behalf of their user base. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's kind of how I think about technologies. Like, there's so much power, I think, in the people that are developing the technologies, that even like a good intentioned idea, like what was happening over at Gemini, can manifest itself in ways that we aren't expecting. And that isn't necessarily like their fault, but what other things could we do to basically red team that system to anticipate all this harm before it even happens in the first place?
All right. One last question. Do you think that at some point generative AI wakes up, like Ray Kurzweil talks about, and becomes sentient, and like in Her or something like this? And if so, then what happens? And now we're obviously off in sci-fi, but I'm just curious. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's so much interesting research on AI consciousness. I would
Mhm.
really encourage you. I have one of my professors actually researches this exact topic, so I'll send you his name. His name's Henry Shevlin. For anyone who's listening, if you want to look up his research papers, he's really interested in this. So right now, no, AI is not sentient. I think there are ways that AI is used that gives the illusion of sentience. So a lot of people are,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's a lot of people, but there are people in the universe that are using AI as like actual humanitarian types of companions. So
Mhm.
AI boyfriends and girlfriends, AI best friend, AI my dead dad. Like there's many different things that it could be to someone. And ultimately, like, because how generative AI works, it's just like next word prediction. If you're giving it context about your personal life, like it's able to pick up on those things and in theory, generate novel insights that make it feel like a conversation. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to anthropomorphize AI to feel human. And then ultimately, people grow that attachment to these technologies as though they are a companion in their
Mhm.
life. And so I think whether or not it's actually sentient or not doesn't super matter if the user experience is helping people uh, like lean in that direction, whether or not the underlying technology is able to, have thoughts and feelings of its own and all of that doesn't really matter. I think that there's a lot of other implications that we can think through there. So I think there's a lot of like really interesting regulation right now of like
Mhm.
helping people realize when they're engaging with an AI. Um, you can use AI to like mimic voices. There was like this really crazy case that happened recently where people were cloning people's voices and sending ransom calls
Yeah.
using people's voices. And so there's like whether or not like that's actually real or not, it causes actual harm for people. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I'm not one to say if it's like gonna be conscious or not. There are like plenty of arguments for or against, but I think irrespective, like how we engage with these technologies as they become more and more human-like and are able to mask human historically human kind of capabilities. How do we actually discern what we're working with here, and what are the implications of that? I think is an interesting, at least short-term conversation. But yeah, I'd hope that if something becomes sentient, like there's plenty of ways to like program in rules and like virtue ethicists like will train models to think like have characteristics that we think as humans are ultimately good,
Mhm.
but the efficacy of those things also is debatable because again, like machine learning systems are ruminating on plenty of data that could result in plenty of permutations, and you're not going to be able to catch every single edge case. So yeah, I mean, I hope it doesn't become sentient because then there's a lot more problems I'm going to have to deal with, but it very well might become at some point.
Madison, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming today. We'll put a link to your TED Talk down below. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And I loved the idea of transformational transparency. So thank you for that one in particular.
So thanks so much for having me. And hopefully all the listeners are able to engage in AI in positive ways in their lives too.
So thank you for watching another Metamind AI interview. Remember to keep practicing prompting, keep learning, get our prompt pack and quick start video, watch our other videos to learn from other AI experts, and stay tuned to us here on Metamind. Stay subscribed because this is going to get really interesting.